The Winslow house stood, a skeletal silhouette against the early November sky, its Victorian gables reaching like grasping claws. It was isolated, miles from any neighbor, surrounded by thick, silent woods, a place seemingly forgotten by time. For over a decade, this upstate New York mansion had defied sale, its long vacancy a whispered testament to something more than just a sluggish market. This was the latest assignment for Ethan Park, a 30-year-old freelance real estate photographer. A man who prided himself on debunking the very superstitions that clung to such properties. Ethan, jaded by sterile interiors and staged perfection, believed most paranormal claims were merely old wiring or creaky wood. Yet, a growing, almost perverse curiosity about places steeped in dark history drew him here. He envisioned crisp, clean shots that would finally break its unsold curse, a personal victory against the unseen. He was a logical mind, witty, borderline arrogant, but tonight, his resolve would be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. The owners, an elderly couple named the Millers, were peculiar. They insisted the house was perfectly preserved and should sell easily, if only someone could make it past the first night. Their ancient, knowing eyes held a strange, almost wistful quality, as if sharing a private, macabre joke. Ethan, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as a theatrical sales tactic. He decided to stay overnight, a common practice for photographers seeking early morning natural light. It would allow him to capture the house at its most ethereal, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. As sundown approached, around 5 p.m., the last rays of sunlight bled from the sky, plunging the remote countryside into a deep, cold twilight. The house, once merely old, began to feel oppressive. Its towering gables and darkened windows took on a watchful, almost predatory air. Ethan, despite his resolve, felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a heavy silence that seemed to absorb all sound, a stillness that was more unsettling than any noise. He set up his gear in the grand foyer, the click of his camera echoing unnaturally in the vast space. The air was cold, despite the lack of a discernible draft, and carried a faint, musty scent, not just of age, but of something else. Something stagnant and deeply unsettling. A perfume of forgotten things. As darkness fully enveloped the mansion, the only light came from his powerful photographic strobes and the beam of his headlamp. The shadows seemed to deepen, to stretch, to writhe in the periphery of his vision, playing tricks on his eyes, making the familiar unfamiliar. He moved through the downstairs rooms, meticulously framing shots, his professional focus a shield against the growing unease. The antique furniture, draped in white sheets, looked like silent, spectral figures waiting. The framed family portraits lining the grand staircase, their subjects long dead, seemed to watch him with an unnerving intensity, their eyes following his every move. Ethan paused at the foot of the staircase, looking up into the inky blackness of the upper floors. Locals whispered that every person who stayed overnight in the house heard someone calling their name from upstairs, usually in the voice of someone they loved. He scoffed, a cynical smile touching his lips. He had no loved ones to call him, not anymore. His past, his personal trauma, was a locked door he rarely opened. He found a comfortable spot on a large, dust-sheeted sofa in the living room, setting his alarm for early morning. He pulled a blanket over himself, confident in his logic, convinced that the night would pass uneventfully and he would emerge victorious. Another haunted listing debunked. The silence of the house, however, felt less like peace and more like a held breath. Waiting. Ethan woke abruptly, a jolt of adrenaline shooting through him. His eyes snapped open, instantly scanning the oppressive darkness of the living room. He fumbled for his phone, its screen a harsh beacon in the gloom. 2:13 a.m., the devil's hour. A cold dread, far deeper than the house's chill, settled in his gut, a premonition of something truly terrifying. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Clear, distinct, rhythmic footsteps directly above him, in the attic. The same attic the Millers had sworn was sealed shut, its entrance boarded up for decades. His rational mind immediately scrambled for explanations. Squirrels, raccoons, perhaps a loose shutter banging in the wind. But the sound was too heavy, too deliberate, too human, too impossibly real. He swung his legs off the sofa, his heart pounding against his ribs. He grabbed his powerful flashlight, its beam cutting a stark path through the darkness. He knew where. The attic access was a small, unassuming door on the second-floor landing. He had checked it earlier, confirming it was indeed sealed with old rusted bolts and thick planks, a fact that now mocked his certainty. He crept up the grand staircase, each creak of the old wood amplifying the sound of the footsteps above. They continued, a slow, methodical pacing, back and forth, directly over the landing. It was the sound of someone walking, not scurrying, not flapping, but walking with a heavy, deliberate tread that vibrated through the very structure of the house. A chilling rhythm. Reaching the landing, Ethan shone his flashlight on the attic door. It was still sealed. The rusted bolts were in place, the planks undisturbed. Yet, the footsteps continued, just inches beyond the wood, a chilling impossibility that defied all logic, all reason. He pressed his ear to the door, and the sound was unmistakable. The soft thud of a footfall, followed by the faint drag of something heavy, something vast. A new sound joined the footsteps, a low, almost imperceptible groan, like old wood straining. Under immense pressure, it seemed to emanate from the attic as well, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the door, through his very bones. It was a sound of immense weight, of something vast and ancient shifting above him, something that shouldn't be there, something that had awakened. Then, a faint click echoed from downstairs. Ethan spun around, his flashlight beam darting towards the ground floor. The heavy oak front door, which he had locked and bolted securely, was now ajar, a sliver of inky blackness visible between the frame and the door. He hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't heard the lock turn. It had simply silently opened, an impossible act. A cold draft swept through the foyer, carrying with it a faint, sweet, cloying scent like decaying flowers and something else, something vaguely metallic. A smell of age and forgotten things. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if an unseen presence had just entered the house, or perhaps had been released from within its ancient walls, now free to roam. Ethan's skepticism, his carefully constructed shield of logic, began to crumble. This was not old wiring. This was not creaky wood. This was something else, something malevolent and intelligent, playing a terrifying game. He was not alone in the Winslow house. He was a guest, an intruder, in a place that had its own hidden, terrifying agenda, a silent, predatory will. A faint, old-fashioned melody began to drift from the drawing room. A melancholic tune played on a piano, its notes tinny and distorted, as if coming from a great distance or from a time long past. Ethan knew there was no piano in the drawing room, only dust-sheeted furniture. The house was alive, and it was playing its own terrifying symphony, a macabre performance just for him. The music from the drawing room swelled, a phantom waltz that echoed through the silent house, its notes both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Ethan, his heart pounding, moved through the mansion, his camera clutched in his trembling hand. He tried to capture the anomalies, to document the impossible, but his camera's screen remained stubbornly blank, its battery inexplicably drained. The house was playing its own game, and it didn't want to be photographed. It wanted to be experienced. He found himself drawn back to the grand staircase, his gaze fixed on the framed family portraits that lined the wall. They were old, faded photographs depicting generations of the Winslow family, their faces stern and unsmiling. He had dismissed them earlier as mere decor, but now a chilling compulsion made him examine them more closely, a sense of dread tightening in his gut, a premonition of what they held. The first portrait was of a stern-faced patriarch, his eyes fixed on some distant point. As Ethan stared, a subtle shift occurred. A faint, almost imperceptible shadow began to form directly behind the man's shoulder, a blurred outline that seemed to emerge from the background. Ethan blinked, rubbed his eyes, convinced it was a trick of the light, a figment of his sleep-deprived imagination. But the shadow remained. He moved to the next portrait, a woman in a high-collared dress. As he watched, the same subtle shift occurred. A figure, indistinct but undeniably present, began to coalesce behind her, its form slightly clearer than the last, its presence more defined. It was standing just a little closer, its outline more menacing, a silent, unseen companion, a terrifying addition to the family. Ethan's disbelief warred with mounting terror. He frantically checked and rechecked the portraits, moving from one to another, his flashlight beam dancing across the glass. Each one, in turn, seemed to change before his very eyes. The figures behind the subjects grew clearer, more distinct, their forms becoming more human-like, their faces still shadowed, but their presence undeniable, their eyes seeming to bore into him. Then the calling began. A soft whisper, barely audible at first, seemed to drift from the upper floors. "Ethan?" The voice was impossibly familiar, gentle, laced with a warmth that tore at his heart. It was his mother's voice. His mother, who had died years ago, her memory a constant, aching wound in his soul, now calling to him from the darkness. His emotional vulnerability, his unaddressed grief, became the entity's most potent weapon. The voice called again, clearer now, more insistent, weaving tales of comfort, of longing, of a reunion. "Come upstairs, darling. I'm waiting." He stumbled backward, away from the portraits, away from the seductive lure of the voice, his mind screaming in protest, fighting against the insidious pull. But then, another voice joined the chorus. His childhood friend, long lost to time. His estranged father, his voice gruff but undeniably real. Multiple voices, all loved, all lost, all calling to him from the darkness of the upper floors, urging him to ascend, to embrace the impossible, to surrender to the house's chilling embrace, to join them in the shadows. The house's oppressive presence became suffocating, physical. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and that ancient metallic tang. Shadows writhed in the corners, seeming to coalesce into indistinct forms. The phantom music from the drawing room swelled, a discordant symphony that mingled with the voices, a terrifying lullaby designed to break his will, to shatter his last defenses. Ethan knew with a chilling certainty that the house was not just haunted. It was alive, and it was playing a terrifying game, exploiting his deepest fears, his most profound grief, drawing him deeper into its labyrinthine madness. The portraits were not just changing. They were a warning, a horrifying prophecy of his own impending fate, a glimpse into his terrifying future. The portraits continued to change rapidly, a horrifying flipbook of encroaching terror. The figures behind the subjects were now directly behind them, their shadowed faces almost visible, their eyes seeming to stare out from the glass, not at the viewer, but directly at Ethan. They were no longer just reflections. They were presences, silent witnesses to his unraveling sanity, their gazes fixed upon him. The calling from upstairs became a constant, overwhelming roar, multiple voices, all loved, all lost, all begging him to ascend. "Come to us, Ethan. We miss you." The pleas twisted his heart, tearing at the last vestiges of his resistance. He knew, instinctively, that to answer the call was to surrender, to become another silent resident of the Winslow house, another face. In the gallery dot, he made a desperate, frantic attempt to escape. He lunged for the front door, the one that had mysteriously unlocked itself. He pulled at the handle, but it was jammed, locked tight, as if sealed from the outside. He tried the windows, but they were painted shut, unyielding, their glass reflecting. Only his own terrified face, distorted and pale, a trapped animal. The house actively prevented his departure. Doors slammed shut behind him, unseen hands pushing him back. Floorboards groaned ominously, as if the very structure was alive, guiding him deeper into its core, into its inescapable embrace. The phantom music swelled, a triumphant, discordant symphony, celebrating his capture, mocking his futile attempts at freedom, a soundtrack to his despair. He stumbled back towards the grand staircase, his eyes fixed on the portraits, his mind racing, and then he saw it. Not just the figures behind the subjects, but in the reflection of the glass, behind him, standing just a little closer with each passing second, were more figures. Shadowy, indistinct, but undeniably there, mirroring his terror, their unblinking eyes fixed on his back. Closing in, the climax was a terrifying blur. He was cornered, trapped, the voices overwhelming him, the shadowy figures in the reflections. Closing in, he felt a cold, slender hand touch his shoulder, and the voice, his mother's voice, whispered directly into his ear. No longer pleading, but a chilling welcome. "Welcome home, darling. You're one of us now." He screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was swallowed by the sudden, deafening crescendo of the phantom music and the triumphant chorus of voices. He stumbled backward, away from the reflections, away from the horrifying truth of the Winslow house. But as he fell, a new chilling sensation crept over him. The voices in his mind were gone, replaced by a single deep, resonant hum, echoing not from the house, but from within his own skull, a chilling, internal resonance. The Winslow house sat silent and empty, bathed in the pale, ethereal light of dawn. The Millers, the elderly couple, would arrive later, their faces serene, their eyes holding that same knowing, wistful quality. They would find Ethan's camera, its battery miraculously full, its memory card filled with clean, well-lit photos of the house, perfectly preserved. But Ethan Park, the skeptical photographer, was gone. And sometimes, on a cold, early November night, if a potential buyer was brave enough to stay overnight in the Winslow house, they might just hear a new voice calling their name from upstairs. Voice that sounds impossibly familiar, perhaps a bit jaded, a bit sarcastic, urging them to come closer, to join the perfectly preserved collection, to become another face in the Winslow house, a permanent resident of its chilling history.